Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Matcha Mornings. I am very, very excited that you've decided to join me for the second episode of Matcha Mornings, and it's so fun after so many years of dreaming about this podcast to actually see it come to life and for you to be out there listening to the show. And today on the podcast, I am super excited to be diving into Ayurveda, and we're doing a bit of an Ayurveda 101 episode with a yoga teacher and yoga Ayurveda specialist, Kim Fenton from Get Your Life Together Yoga. And Kim and I actually met through business consulting. She worked with me as a business coach for a while, and then I found out that she was doing Ayurveda sessions and growing her business that way. And as you guys know, if you listened to last week's episode of the show or the very first episode of this podcast, that I've had a lot of hormonal challenges, and I thought, hey, I wonder if Ayurveda could help with this. And so her and I have been working together for a couple of months now, and honestly, Ayurveda has been, I think, the game changer that I've been looking for in my life. And as you'll hear in this episode, I had dabbled with Ayurveda before working with Kim, but really not more than some lemon water in the mornings and tongue scraping and using a couple different supplements and kind of understanding my dosha. But she's really helped me dive into some imbalances that I've been experiencing in my body and just helping me to understand how to balance things and how that impacts my hormones. So if you are interested in more natural ways of hormone balancing, more natural ways of living, eating, and really learning more about kind of tuning into your body, the cycles it goes through, as well as the cycles of the seasons, then Ayurveda will definitely be something that I think is right up your alley. And I hope that you guys really enjoy this episode of Ayurveda 101 with Kim Fenton. So without further ado, here she is. Kim, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive in and chat about Ayurveda. It's a topic that I'm super, super interested in, and I've learned so much from you about, and I'm excited to, talk all things Ayurveda 101. But before we get there, can you just introduce yourself to people a little bit, who you are, what you do, where you're based, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks. Again, my name is Kim Fenton. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm based here in Buffalo, New York, which is an awesome city if you ever get the chance to come. I'm also a certified Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. I teach studio yoga classes in Buffalo. I also see private clients for both yoga and Ayurveda consultations. I teach a bunch of Ayurveda workshops here in the area locally as well. I also created a blog called Get Your Life Together Yoga, which is a resource for yoga and Ayurveda. But the approach is a little more geared toward what I call the transferable skills of yoga. As I always say, yoga and Ayurveda helped me personally get my life together. So that's just what I like to kind of convey with the blog. So on my website, it's just an observation and reflection of all those other little things that we never anticipated, those extra benefits that we get from yoga and Ayurveda. Yeah, it's just been really exciting to grow and share this all with so many people.
Amazing. I love it. Yeah. And it's been fun seeing your business grow and getting to see you do so much cool stuff with it. And with the Ayurveda side of things, when did you first get introduced to that? And I guess, how did you first get introduced to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had never even heard of Ayurveda until I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training. So I trained at the Himalayan Institute, which is a Hatha program in the Sri Vidya tradition, but it's very focused on the energetics. So prana, chakras, meditation, relaxation, all those other pieces. Himalayan Institute is actually a sister organization to Yoga International. So they share headquarters in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. So if you've heard of Yoga International, Himalayan Institute is right there with it as well. So Ayurveda was part of our 200-hour YTT. That really served as my baseline introduction into Ayurveda. I have another whole life working in higher education. And in that field, we do a bunch of those, leadership personality assessments like Strengths Quest, Myers-Briggs, Love Language. And I remember the first time I learned about Ayurveda, it blew my mind because just like those tests, it helped me really understand myself so much better. I remember thinking, oh my God, there's a reason why I do the certain thing, or there's a reason why my body acts like this. And so just like those tests are kind of for like your leadership style, Ayurveda was for my body, which was really, really interesting. It just felt so validating knowing that there was a reason why all these things happen, and then also empowering just to know that I had some key information now to really help myself feel better. So since I got so much personally from even just a baseline introduction to Ayurveda, I decided to take the Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist training. So the Himalayan Institute offers this training as well. It's all around the country now that you can take it. And it's just a really great training on Ayurveda for yoga teachers, for yoga students, or just anyone who's interested in an alternative way of healing.
Yeah, that's really neat. It was bringing me back to when I did my 200-hour teacher training, and I was kind of the same way. I remember we did like an Ayurveda quiz on what our dosha was, and these are words that like I had never really heard before.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd heard them like a yoga teacher saying them in passing in a practice, but definitely were not familiar words to me. And having the same kind of thoughts as you, like, oh, there's like something that categorizes my desire to sleep in the morning. Like, that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same thought. Exactly.
Yeah, it's super neat, and it's always cool to dive in more. And I'm definitely, curious about that training. I think it's something I'd like to do in the
Mm-hmm.
future as well, just because it's like, I don't know, there's just so much good stuff with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really, it was a really, really worthwhile experience, and it's geared towards yoga teachers too. So just the ways that you can incorporate Ayurveda into your sequences that you teach every week in your classes and stuff like that. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's super cool. And so for people who aren't super familiar with Ayurveda and they're, kind of like you and I were back
Of
before
course.
teacher training, can you just give an overview of like what is Ayurveda and why is it something that we should know about? Like, why are we talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So they say, I've heard someone say, to get into Ayurveda right now is like getting into yoga in 1995. So we're just at the kind of cusp of this being a bit more mainstream and a name that people have really heard because it is starting to pick up traction. So Ayurveda is an ancient system of health, Ayurvedic medicine. So it's kind of like an ancestor to modern Western medicine. Ayurveda and yoga kind of started their path together. It's about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, depending. And they both come from the Vedic text, which is some of the oldest literature in the world that still exists. So again, before the days of Western medicine, blood tests, diagnostic imaging, all that stuff, yoga or Ayurveda was the way that the ancient sages came to understand their bodies and nature as a whole. So Ayurveda is this very perceptive and intuitive way of caring for ourselves, kind of alongside Western medicine now as we can see it. Dr. John Douillard, he's an Ayurvedic practitioner here in the US. And he describes Ayurveda as finally swimming downstream with your nature instead of constantly, swimming against the current and everything and wondering why we're so tired and why we're so depleted all the time. I really love that description. We totally spend so much time trying to work against our bodies, and Ayurveda helps us figure out what's going on in our body. Really important, Ayurveda teaches us how to read our body and know what the signs are, know what to look for, and then what to do to keep it in balance if we do find some signs that something's out of whack. Ayurveda is really big in terms of what it encompasses, but it's all geared toward health, medicine, well-being. So it's not a substitute for Western medicine. I always say if you're having a heart attack or you break an arm, you still got to go to the hospital. But Ayurveda offers some really intuitive knowledge about our bodies. And then from that, you get recommendations on everything from diet to lifestyle to the type of yoga or exercise that benefits your particular body the best. There are Ayurvedic doctors and practitioners who can prescribe different herbs or other practices. You can do Ayurvedic cleanses. You can do Ayurvedic massage and body work. So there's a lot that really fits into this umbrella of what Ayurveda really is. The idea is that the mind and the body are inextricable from each other and inextricable from nature. So what we take in, whether it be in our food, our drink, environment, the air, all of it has an effect on us. Ayurveda focuses mostly on the prevention of disease rather than treating symptoms after we get sick, which makes sense in the evolutionary perspective that our ancient ancestors, that was their best chance of survival, was to prevent disease. In Ayurveda, food is really seen as medicine. And then the 5 elements, which are air, space, fire, water, and earth, are the tools that help us understand and read our bodies too. And then another part of Ayurveda, which you mentioned before, is that it's personalized to you. So we have doshas in Ayurveda, and we'll get to that in a lot more depth, I know, in just a moment. But we've heard that we're all supposed to eat a lot of greens, or everybody should drink a gallon of water a day. But Ayurveda actually recognizes that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because everybody's bodies are so different. And sometimes we feel out of whack or have different symptoms, whether it's fatigue or digestive issues or joint pain or inflammation, whatever it could be, because we're following this mainstream advice that works for a lot of people, but it's not what we personally need in our own bodies. And so we struggle, and we get that feeling, like Dr. Driard said, that, we're trying to swim upstream all our lives. So then that gets us to the doshas, which you mentioned before as well. So the doshas are a really big idea in Ayurveda. The idea is that there's 3 different types of bodies and minds. So we call them our constitution. So every body has different needs. There's different sicknesses that they might be prone to, different things that help them become balanced, or different things that take them out of balance. So if you step back again into the era of the ancient sages in India, they were incredibly perceptive and intuitive, again, about understanding our bodies, our minds, and nature as a whole. So they started to identify these 5 different elements in nature, which from the Vedic text, space, air, fire, water, and earth. So our ancient sages here noticed that everything in nature is made up of some combination, some different ratio of these 5 elements. And then they also recognized that for us as human beings, we're part of the animal kingdom, we're part of that natural world, that those 5 elements were in each of us as well. And then we each have our own different ratio. We each have our own different kind of combination. But they simplified it down to 3 different body types, which they call doshas. So when you hear me say dosha, it's just another word for your body constitution, your body type. So our dosha stays the same throughout our entire life. It's what we are when we're kind of perfectly in balance. It's what we were when we're born. So the dosha that contains the earth and fire elements is called kapha. The dosha that has water, but most prominently fire, is called pitta. And then the third dosha, which is made up of air and space elements, is called vata. So each of us have all 5 of those elements within us naturally in different ratios. So nobody is strictly one dosha or another. And then there's also not one dosha that's better than the other. They all have their gifts. They all have their challenges. Like, there's definitely certain perks to being some doshas. But in the end, they all are just different. One's not really better or worse than the other. And then, and so we can also get out of balance pretty easily as well, especially living in 2019 where, we're not really living with our, we're not eating with the seasons. We're not really eating quite as much food from the earth. And so it's easier for us these days to get out of balance. And so we could all be feeling symptoms caused by an imbalance of any of the 3 doshas. So it doesn't matter necessarily what our primary dosha is. What matters the most is the symptoms that we're feeling. And so Ayurveda helps us to start to work through those symptoms that come up for us.
Yeah, I have a question about that, because I feel like this is one of the things that I think it was cleared up a little bit more in my 300-hour training when we did Ayurveda. But when I first did it, it was actually really hard to answer some of the questions, because they ask you know, about your body type and your skin and your hair. And I feel like sometimes these things change. Like sometimes the quality of your digestion changes. And I feel like for me, it's like I'm trying to give the most accurate answer on this like basic dosha test. And I'm like, but like for my whole life, or like right now. And I think the missing piece was like, this idea of, in order to treat it, you need to kind of look at what's going on right in that moment, because we want to go back to that place of balance that we're born with.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny, like when we think back to like the things that, we had as kids or just all that. I remember, again, I live in a very cold area of the country, and I remember being in like first grade, and it was, the middle of January, and I kept wearing shorts to school because I just got so hot. I ran so hot all the time. And so that, like, when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely a pitta. I definitely have a lot of that fire energy. And so sometimes when we look back as kids, it's really easy to see kind of before all this other stuff happens and before we get out of balance. That's usually pretty true for a lot of us in terms of what kind of comes to the surface as kids. But yeah, and then in my later years, I was really confused when I first took the dosha test, because I'm like, well, wait a minute, I think I'm this though also. And do I just have 2 doshas, which some people do. So I was really confused. So it took a little bit more kind of deep diving and working with a Ayurvedic consultant myself just to kind of get to the root of it and really understand myself. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. So when you take these quizzes online, like you said, so like there's one, I have one on my website as well. And so the first one that you can take is basically your Prakriti, which Prakriti is, again, just another Sanskrit word that means your true nature. So same as your dosha. And so those are the questions that you'll answer like throughout your whole life. So yeah, even though lately, I might be a little bit more on the chilly side or whatever, I've always kind of for my whole life ran warm. And I know that because like when I was in first grade, I was wearing shorts to school in the middle of January. And my mom didn't
Which
let me
is
do that,
insane.
by the way. I know. I would like hide it. I would like put them like underneath like my snow pants or like my wind pants or something. And then as
Oh
soon
my
as I
God.
got to school, I would like put on my shorts, but it was really, or like hide them in my backpack. So it was funny. But yeah, so I just remember that about myself. And so, yeah, so when I take those, like what's been true for your whole life kind of quizzes, yeah, I usually look back to childhood or the things that haven't really changed. And then most of us will take a second quiz, or sometimes it's kind of all bundled into one. That'll be your current imbalance quiz. So the Sanskrit word for that is Vikriti, which again just means the ways that you're out of balance. So you might have an excess of a particular dosha in your body, and it doesn't necessarily need to be your primary dosha. You can have an excess of any of the other elements in your body at a given time. So it can get really tricky as we get to be adults in terms of like, wait, is that my how I really am, or is that just an imbalance? So yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways that we can dive into those things and kind of help people get some clarity. But at the end of the day, if you're having an issue with your digestion, it doesn't really matter, honestly, if it's part of your just an imbalance in one area that you've had. It could be you've had it for years, or it could be it's just your true nature. It doesn't really matter because we still are going to address that symptom, whatever it could be for you. But yeah, no, that's definitely a cause of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember learning about the Prakriti and is it Vikriti or
Vikriti.
Vikriti, and being like, oh, okay, this answers so much about this this
Yeah.
quiz doing for me.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I was like, oh, I think maybe I like have all three of them, because I was like, the way that you're thinking, I think it's easy to draw from lots of different ones, and definitely found more, I guess, like more from some than others, but was finding answers from all of them. So it's kind of interesting to go into that. I'm curious if you can give, like, we'll put a link for your quiz in the show notes and stuff like that so that people can go
Yeah.
check it out. But can you give like an overview of what each dosha kind of represents? Like, what are the traits of a vata, a pitta, and a kapha?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first dosha, called vata, as you said. So vata is the word that they use to describe people who have a lot of air or space qualities in their constitution. So that could be their body or their mind. And so like you said too, it's possible that you might be pitta in your mind, but vata in your body, for example. So our body and mind can sometimes take on different doshas. And then as you start to hear more about them, like I did for sure, I kind of thought, oh yeah, this one's definitely me. So it's interesting. You might not even need a quiz, but I do have one. So when you think of air and space with vata, it doesn't really weigh much, and it doesn't really have any like boundaries. There's nothing that really confines air or space. So vatas tend to maintain a little bit more lightness in their life. That's both in like the physical sense, like vatas have like usually the thinnest frame bodies. They have, thinner skin. They don't have as thick hair, that kind of thing. But then also in kind of the mental sense as well. So vatas kind of just like they float through life a little bit. They don't usually get weighed down by a lot of the big things that other people sometimes feel kind of bogged down by. They have this kind of head in the clouds mentality sometimes with vatas. So they tend to be really creative, philosophical. They're sometimes really intellectual thinkers. They're really strong communicators. But air and space, of course, are prone to movement in any which direction. And so vatas kind of have that same wind energy, as we call it, in them as well. So again, they don't have those boundaries or the weight to kind of keep them grounded. So vatas are typically out of the box thinkers. They're really spontaneous. They love adventures. They love to just kind of head out without a plan always. They don't really need that plan to feel, like they have a direction of where they want to move to. And then they're really adaptable because, again, they don't really have any expectations about where they want to be headed or what's going to happen for them. They tend to have the lightest stamina of the 3 types as well, just because they're so light. So they don't have that density. They don't have those resources that are quite as available to them as some of the other types do. And then when you think of air and space, there's also a dryness that comes along with that. So Vatas are prone to dryness. It shows up a lot in their skin, their eyes, their sinuses, also in their digestion. So a lot of Vatas will commonly suffer from bloating and gas, which is literally air trapped in their bodies. And then the dryness in their digestion also results in like constipation or more dry or hard elimination. Another problem for Vatas is all that movement, frenetic energy in their mind makes them overthinkers and they worry a lot. Sometimes it's hard for people with Vata to remember things, or sometimes they come off as a little flighty or spacey if they're kind of out of whack some days. And then all of the recommendations for Vata have to do with hydrating, warming up the body, warming up the digestion, slowing down, and grounding. So those are some of the bigger things for Vata. And then the second dosha is Pitta. And Pitta, again, is just a term for those who have a lot of fire and water in them. So fire has that intensity to it, of course, and urgency. And that really describes a lot of the traits of Pitta dominant people. So Pittas, they're usually about a medium build. They gain muscle pretty easily. All that fire means they have a really strong digestion. It also means that there's often some inflammation in Pittas. So anytime you see redness or intensity in the body, it's usually a Pitta thing. So whether that's acne, rashes, urgency to go to the bathroom, sharp pain, even red hair, like literally the redness is a Pitta thing as well. They usually run hot in their body, like I said before. So Pittas don't usually need a sweater. They tend to sweat a little bit more than other people. With that strong digestion, they don't like to miss a meal. Their digestion often runs a little bit too strong. And then sometimes they end up with loose stools or diarrhea, frequent urination. That's another kind of Pitta problem. But missing a meal was one of the things that I really identified with when I first did this. Is I was like, oh my God, there's a reason why, I get like kind of agitated if I miss a meal. So that was one of the things that was really interesting and kind of jumped off the page for me. But mentally, Pittas are really sharp. They're highly motivated. They often are striving for leadership positions at work. They tend to be kind of fired up as people, or even hot-headed at times. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. They can be like perfectionist type people sometimes. And they're constantly feeling some kind of heat or pressure. So Pittas really need to focus on cooling down their internal heat and calming down the pace in their life. So Pittas have a little bit more stamina than Vatas, but it's not infinite. And when Pittas let that fire really kind of burn wild, they're left depleted and burned out. So that's the really kind of catch for Pittas, is trying to make sure that they don't get too fiery, too intense, too hot-headed, but then also in their bodies, so that they can get rid of the heat that can really tend to accumulate and cause some issues for them too. And then Kapha is the third type. So these are the folks with a lot of earth and water elements in their bodies. Earth and water are the most dense, heavy elements. So Kaphas tend to be the sturdiest body types. They end up typically being the most muscular. They have the most stamina out of all 3 types. They generally have a larger frame. But Kapha's job is, being made of earth and water, is to nurture and grow. So Kaphas also have this tendency to accumulate weight on their body as well. But then they also have, again, from this like really lustrous kind of nurturing perspective, they've got this thick, shiny hair. They've got big eyes. They've got smooth skin. Physically, Kaphas tend to have some trouble with their lungs and their sinuses. So a lot of Kaphas might have allergies or be prone to colds, asthma, all that stuff. Mentally, Kaphas are this big, like Mother Earth energy. So as people, those with Kapha tend to be really giving. They have a lot of compassion and kindness. They do really well with emotions, whether it be other people. So they end up a lot as like counselors and healthcare, as teachers. But one of the big challenges for Kapha is that they have trouble getting moving. So even though they've got the most stamina out of the 3 types, when you picture a lot of earth together, it's, if you picture a boulder, it's really hard to get a boulder to move at first. And that inertia is something that Kapha really deals with. But once you get the boulder moving, then the momentum builds up, and then it can just kind of keep going forever. So Kaphas just need to be mindful of that elemental tendency of the earth and water to become inert or to kind of stagnate in that sense. So staying in movement or staying really active is important for kaphas.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for going through all of that. And
Yeah.
every time I hear it, I feel like I get like new, good little tidbits of wisdom out of that. And
Yeah.
I'm like, ooh, maybe I have more of this too, which is kind of funny. But I'm curious when it comes to like being in balance and out of balance, because there's this kind of natural constitution. And then as we go through life, obviously there's lots of stuff that happens that can kind of, shift us and change us and throw us out of balance.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, like, kind of how we get out of balance and then how we kind of get ourselves back into balance. And something, too, that I am curious about, and we can break this down. I know this is a bunch of questions all at once, is this idea of like, if we have these tendencies towards certain things, where is the line of like falling into that too much to the point that it's like out of balance? And then, how do we bring it back? And when I say that, I mean, like, I remember hearing in my 200-hour training, like, okay, if you have more kapha tendencies, so maybe slower movements, like the yin yoga types, like those people need like the power yoga, the ashtanga. It's
Hmm.
like the pittas that need the restorative. So kind of, how do we use that to bring ourselves back into balance and recognize when we're out of balance?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we all have all five elements within us. So, there's never going to be like a perfect in terms of like, this is exactly kind of what did it and what didn't do it. But, so like, for example, all of our lungs are driven by kapha. So in every single person, whether they have no kapha in their constitution or they're all kapha, everybody's lungs are driven by kapha, regardless of dosha. All of our joints are driven by vata. All of our digestion is driven by pitta. But we can often end up with a little bit of extra energy from one element or another accumulating with us at any point. So that can come from a ton of different places. It can be the food that we eat. So again, just being in life and in the 21st century, the food that we eat is highly processed. We're not really eating from what's naturally coming to harvest and in our local area, because we can import food from all over around the world. So a lot of the times what we're eating, because we have so much choice, is that we can end up with things that might kind of aggravate us on a particular season. I know we'll talk about seasons in a bit too. And then the other piece of it, that it could just be in terms of the choices that we make. So like you mentioned, the kind of yoga that we do can actually throw us into balance or throw us out of balance. Our job can do it as well. So we might have a job that's really high pressure, and even if we're not pitta at all, it's constantly adding fire to us just by having that intensity in our job. So there's a lot of different ways that all this can happen, and everything as well. And then there's so much that is just kind of circumstantial. Like if someone's going through something, they might not maybe have a lot of vata, or maybe they do, but just based on what they're going through, they might have some anxiety, which is a vata condition as well. So it's just kind of a product of living today that different foods kind of increase or decrease any particular dosha. So if we tend to choose a lot of those foods, then we might end up with a little bit extra of those elements within us. But like you also mentioned, so in Ayurvedic treatment, there's two key ideas that help us figure out all of these interventions to help bring anybody back into balance. So the first is like attracts like, and the second is like increases like. So for example, pretty much every vata person I know really likes popcorn. It's almost kind of like a running joke in Ayurveda. My nephew's 2, and he is as vata as you could be, but he goes absolutely crazy for popcorn. Like when you start popping this popcorn, he freaks out. He's so excited. But so like attracts like though. So the texture of popcorn is that it's dry, it's rough, it's crunchy. So that's going to increase the dry, rough qualities in our body too, which is the like increases like. Same thing with salad, like not to pick on vatas, but a lot of vatas that I know love to eat salad. But vata is cold, it's dry, it's rough by the elemental qualities that it has. So the last thing that a vata needs is to eat more food that's cold, dry, crunchy, and rough. So a lot of times we choose foods because we're attracted to them because they have the same kind of qualities that we do, or we choose styles of yoga, or we choose jobs, or all those kinds of things. So for example, I am a pitta. So I know that when I first started doing yoga, I wanted to do hot yoga because I'm like, if I'm doing yoga as this pitta high achiever, I'm going to do the hardest kind of yoga there is. And I didn't really realize until a while later that that was actually causing me to really not feel so great after, when I was, had a headache constantly, or I was really dehydrated, or, I just felt really tired and depleted after. So I started to figure out that, that like attracts like. So me being a person with a lot of fire was attracted to a hot yoga class. Like attracts like, but then like also increases like. So the hot yoga class added even more fire onto me and everything as well. Sometimes we make intuitive choices, though, that are actually a little bit more supportive. So again, for me as a pitta, I have never liked spicy food. And a lot of pittas, sometimes they have that like attracts like quality with spicy food. But for me, as soon as I eat like a pepper or something really spicy, I get uncomfortable immediately. And so because that's such an immediate response in my body, I figured out really quickly in my life that that's just not something that I like. So I was able to kind of make an intuitive choice there that helped me to balance it. And so sometimes our body is able to do that and kind of put it all together a little bit more quickly. But sometimes we'll, especially when we're stressed out, we'll tend to choose more of the things that are like attracts like, that will just kind of help us build and build and build and get accumulating even more of those elemental qualities that are already kind of high for us to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard because you're like, you kind of also like want to do things that, make you feel, I guess I want to say like make you feel good, but I feel like I can also relate to, I think I went through a phase kind of when I first started going to yoga, like, type A personality, super hardcore, probably like pitta overdrive. And I was like, if I'm not like dripping sweat at the end of this yoga class, like it's not worth my money type thing.
Exactly.
I'm totally not like that at all, which is super funny, but
Exactly.
I can definitely relate to that. And I think that there's like, I don't know, it's kind of like exercising is better than not exercising. So if I'm not going to go, if I don't do that, it's like, where do we find that line, I guess? Like, where do we find that balance? Hey everyone, we're taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Muse. Muse tracks your brain during meditation to give you real-time feedback on your meditation, guiding you into the zone and solving the major problem that most of us have when starting a meditation practice. Muse lets you know when you're doing it right. Your Muse headband basically acts like your personal assistant. While you meditate, Muse measures whether your mind is calm or active and translates that data into sounds. When you're calm, you'll hear peaceful sounds, and when your mind wanders, the sounds will intensify, guiding you back to a calm state. So if you're like me, where you have a really solid meditation practice and you love to do it every day or every couple of days, but sometimes you just find that you really can't get in the rhythm because your mind is so busy, Muse might be for you. The best part about this is that I have a 15% discount off just for listeners of Matcha Mornings. So head on over to bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Muse to get your discount. All right, back to the episode.
Exactly. And like I said earlier, there's all these recommendations that we, turn on TV or we read in a magazine that, oh, we should do this. But hot yoga is a good example of someone might say, oh, you should do hot yoga. It's great. But then once we get a little bit more tuned into, okay, how does my body actually respond to that though? Then I start to realize, oh yeah, hot yoga is not for me. So it gets really interesting in terms of how we balance those things out. And then you brought up another really interesting thing too, which is that, pittas should be doing restorative. But what's really funny is that it is really difficult to get pittas in the door of a restorative class. Because exactly like you said, that they just don't see the value. They're like, I'm not sweating, I'm not moving. What's the point? Pittas need that kind of movement to keep themselves engaged and actually wanting to be there. So for Ayurveda, the sell, I guess, for pittas sometimes is, all right, well, why don't you start with a slow flow class? You can still move, you can still do the poses you want to do. We're just going to do them a little bit slower, and you're going to do it once a week. So then kind of getting people in slowly. And that's another piece of Ayurveda as well, is that it's never just, if we do a consultation with someone, it's never, okay, you have to stop hot yoga immediately, because it's just not going to go over well. It's just human psychology. It's not something that person is going to see as helpful until we start to show them the other side of things. So yeah, absolutely. Or then you have like kaphas on the other side of it, who they might be a little bit more drawn to yin or to restorative. But what we need them to kind of get to for themselves is a little bit more movement. So, they might be really good in a vinyasa class, or if kaphas don't have any kind of accompanying pitta symptoms, then kapha can do really well actually in a heated class. So it's just kind of like getting people to step outside their comfort zone a little bit, maybe once a week, maybe one class that's kind of halfway to where we're looking to hopefully have someone end up. But yeah, there's a lot of like the just kind of understanding that, these are people and it's their lives, and we can't just kind of totally change everything on everybody and pull the rug out from underneath them all at once, because then it's just not going to be effective and it's not going to be helpful. So yeah, it's just like, that's like kind of the trick is like make one suggestion that's a little bit different for them that they can start once or twice a week. And then maybe they can start to just be a little bit more receptive to figuring out, okay, how do I actually feel after I'm a pitta and I go to that slow flow class? Do I feel better? Do I feel like I got to rest? Some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually feel like that maybe was like a part of my journey. And, like I said, I didn't know anything about Ayurveda back at this point. So but just kind of reflecting on it, like going from this obsession to sweat and do all the hard classes and go to the gym a lot. And then I just, went through this phase where I think it was something similar. A friend was like, hey, will you come to this yoga class with me? And it was restorative. And I remember thinking, damn it, why I'm here and I didn't work out today. Like that really sucks. I would have gone and worked out this morning or on my lunch break had I known that I was coming to a class where I wasn't going to move.
Right.
But I feel like afterwards, like I'm in the class, I'm not going to leave, right? Like that's awkward.
Right.
And I think she had like a buddy pass, so I didn't even pay for it. I was like, whatever, I'll just do it. And I feel like that was like a little moment of like, oh, it actually feels like pretty good to just like chill out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And now I'm like a restorative junkie.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And then in terms of like getting us back to balance. So once we kind of identify that something's going on, which it's sometimes difficult just to be able to tune into our bodies and figure out, okay, this is what's happening. Maybe that's not normal. Even if it's been normal for me and it's been something I've been experiencing, whether it's, just having a lot of bloating or any other digestive issues, whatever it could be. Listening to our bodies and then figuring out what we want to change. And so in Ayurveda, we use what we call opposite therapy as a way to kind of structure our interventions for the different symptoms that people might have. So we have a list of 20 different qualities that we use in Ayurveda when someone has a symptom or something's going on. And it's 10 pairs of opposites. So it's words like cold, hot, sharp, dull, soft, hard, heavy, light, dry, wet, etc. So for pittas, for example, most of their symptoms are going to be described as hot. They're going to be symptoms of heat. So what you'll do to balance symptoms of heat in pitta is to cool it, doing the opposite. Or for vata, many of their issues arise from being cold and dry. So the opposite thing for someone who's experiencing signs of excess vata should be to work to incorporate things that are moist and that are warm, especially in their diet. So for example, one of the best things that vata can eat is like a warm soup or a stew, because it's going to be really effective in counteracting those qualities in their body. And then it's really intuitive once we draw the connection between what we're feeling, how can we name it to one of our 20 different qualities that we have. And then once you can identify that, which one of the qualities it fits in under our 20, then it's just incorporating the opposite. Now there's a ton of more really complicated problems and issues that aren't quite so simple, but everything really comes back to using those opposite qualities. So I have an ebook on my website. Again, you'll find the quiz with many common imbalances or signs of excess. So for example, even though for me, I'm pretty much like 0% vata as my nature at birth. I mean, I do have vata in me because I'm a human being, but I still feel symptoms of excess vata, especially in the fall, which I know we'll get to. I have really dry skin around that time. I'll start to feel really mentally flustered. So it's just figuring out, so the dry skin, so I need to add in more moisture, whether that's in the form of drinking more water, eating more veggies, or even using more oil in my cooking or ghee. And then if I'm feeling really like flustered and kind of flighty and like I can't really get my bearings in terms of, my thought processes, then maybe that's when I do, a restorative yoga class, or I'll focus a little bit more on meditation for a few weeks until I can start to feel myself kind of leveling out. So yeah, there's a whole bunch more information on the website, but that's basically the idea, is that we're using opposites just to kind of counteract and bring that balance back into what we're feeling.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And if there's like I guess maybe like a couple things are out of balance, and this might relate to the seasonal stuff, which we'll dive into. How do you know like where to start? Do you just start with like the symptom that is maybe bothering you the most, or that seems like the most prominent, and then go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way to do it. And then the way that you can kind of choose an intervention is, so if you're having a digestive issue or something that's kind of physical in your body, whether it's in your skin, it's in, your elimination, or in your, the way that you're absorbing your food or whatnot, it's usually helpful to choose an intervention that's part of your diet or what you're eating and those kinds of pieces. If you're having symptoms that are a little bit more mental, then you might start to incorporate something that's a little bit more energetic. So that's where yoga and meditation can be really helpful. Pranayama, mantra, all these different things can be helpful. And then the food that we eat is always going to be a really important piece of it too. And then there's a lot of other practices in Ayurveda that we have that, can just be really helpful as well. Like giving yourself a massage or scraping your tongue, like all those things can be part of the interventions that we choose to help to balance out our doshas.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like to start with what are the top one or two most pressing things, and then we'll start to make some changes for those. And again, it's not, Ayurveda really doesn't want us to approach anything as like a big kind of overhaul or, like a quick fix. And so sometimes things are going to take a little bit longer, but we also want to not make so many changes at once that, we change it and then something feels different, but we don't know exactly what it was. So, Ayurveda also likes us to kind of take things slow and see what helps, see what doesn't help, do a lot of trial and error, because it helps us to really be able to see how our body responds. And that's really critical to making sure that we're in tune with what we're feeling. We're in tune with figuring out how things are affecting us, which is that's an important piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good reminder too. I mean, I feel like when I first kind of dove into this, I did like a massive order from Banyan Botanicals, and I was like, I'll take all the things.
Right, exactly. And I did that as well. And then I realized, I'm like, wow, something feels better, something doesn't feel better, but I took 5 different changes. And so now I don't know which one actually helped and which is the one that's bothering me. So yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah. Don't do what we did.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's because if you do all those at once, the whole goal of Ayurvedic treatment is to really help yourself read your body a little bit better. And so it's kind of introducing things slowly, taking things away slowly to figure out, okay, it's been a couple of weeks since I started doing this. How do I really feel? And then again, it's not about just kind of this Western medicine approach of like, okay, I feel this way, so my doctor prescribed me this pill, so I'm just going to take it and assume I'm going to feel better. Ayurveda really wants us to really question, okay, what am I feeling now? Am I feeling this reduce? Am I feeling this increase? All those other pieces, which is really, really important. It's a really important way to approach our own health and well-being, which is really interesting. We don't do that a lot here in the West.
Yeah, absolutely not. It's good that we're starting to more. I'm glad to hear that Ayurveda is like in 1995. I feel like we've got some time to improve. Yeah.
We're almost mainstream.
And so we've kind of alluded to it a couple times, but coming into the seasons, this was something that we started talking about this in my 300-hour training. And I had no idea that Ayurveda played like a bigger role in terms of like, the seasons that are around us. So can you tell us a little bit about how Ayurveda impacts us seasonally?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the really fascinating things that struck me when I first started learning about Ayurveda. So again, as we know that the yogi sages identified that there were these different elements that were outside of the natural world, there's sometimes a year or some, climates or conditions outside where certain elements are going to kind of rise up and be a little bit more prominent. Others are going to kind of fall back just a little bit. So one of the I think the most obvious one to see how Ayurveda shows up in the seasons is summer. So, obviously summer, there's a whole lot of heat. The sun's out finally. And so summer with the heat is Pitta season. And then, so each of the different seasons kind of works through. So to starting in winter, we have Kapha season. So, and I know that, if you live in a different part of the world, I know, Amanda, we've talked about this, that, if you don't have 4 seasons like I have here in northern New York, it might be harder to see. But the idea is like, even in India 5,000 years ago, where they might not have those same kind of seasons where there's snow on the ground either, they still were able to kind of pick up on these different energies that were out there. So for kapha season, usually what the big thing about kapha season that helps me to kind of differentiate it in my mind is that the ground starts to be a lot more dense. So like water doesn't necessarily absorb into the ground as fast as it does other times of the year. So like there might be more puddles, there might be more mud. Here in Buffalo, of course, we've got lots of snow on the ground, and all those are other signs of kapha. So it's cold. Again, like earth and water together are pretty cold. There's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of density to it. But again, kapha's job is to grow. So we start in winter, and we're kind of going through this whole kind of chilling and restorative process in the ground to kind of get everything ready to come alive again and to grow and to flourish in the spring. And so kind of the peak of kapha season is when we start to get into the spring. Like here, the trees will all bud, there will be flowers coming up from the ground, the grass will turn green again. And all of that is kind of the culmination of all the work that kapha has been doing for these few months of, even though it seemed a little bit, kind of dark and dreary for a while, that we're able to kind of start seeing even like the plant life outside, all those different things start to come alive again. So then once you get into kind of the end of spring, beginning of summer, depending on, where you live in the world, it can even be as early as like March or April that this starts to happen. Where like at least here, when you don't really need a coat at night anymore and you've got that heat that sticks around, that's pitta time. And so then you'll see throughout the whole time of pitta, it's really about kind of nature's and like its full glory out there in terms of growth and abundance. And, the crops are coming into harvest, and there's all different kinds of produce that's available throughout this whole time in the summer, and it's really productive. So pitta is productive. Pitta is also about the fire is all the transformation in our body. So again, in pitta time, we're really seeing that whole transformation, that growth and all that in terms of what's happening out there. And then we get into the fall, which is vata season. And at least here in the Northeast, we have the leaves turn color. And so you can literally see all of the trees that used to be, green are turning red, orange, yellow. And the colors on the trees are literally the heat from summer leaving the tree. So that's kind of the end of pitta season. And then so you get into vata, where again, so these qualities like dry, crunchy, rough, the leaves are all drying up, they're falling off the tree, they're crunchy. There's some precipitation, but it's pretty much soaking into the ground pretty quickly. There's a lot of wind, so a lot of movement with that air and space that goes on. So as we go throughout the seasons, all of these different qualities are kind of being absorbed kind of into our own particular kind of conditions that we're having as well. So, in the summer, we're all going to take on more heat. And some of us might notice a difference and be like, oh, wow, I have a lot more heat than I had a month ago. And some of us might just kind of not really absorb enough heat to really have it make a big difference in their life. They might be really happy in summer. If they're maybe a vata type, they might love that kind of climate and then they can thrive. If you're a pitta, you might start to feel too much heat, and then that might start to deplete you a little bit. So what we say is for, if you don't really have a whole lot of symptoms, if you're living a pretty balanced life, you don't have any major health complaints or things like that, the best thing to do is just to eat for the seasons, eat what's natural, what comes to harvest at different times of the year. And then just practice a little bit of balancing yoga, like that goes along with every particular season as well, because there's different yoga sequences that you can do, different poses that are really good, different times a year and all that as well. So for me as a yoga teacher, my classes always throughout the year match up with what Ayurvedic season we're in. And my students don't always necessarily know that in terms of like, hey, why haven't we done a back bend in a couple of weeks, but or we always do back bends, but not big back bends or things like that. So, and then I find that it helps me feel better. It helps the students kind of feel good as they leave and they've had a productive time in class as well. But yeah, so that's kind of one of the biggest things is just kind of keeping an eye out as each season changes, just to see how your body's adapting. And sometimes you'll find that you're super comfortable once a season comes in. You might find that you've kind of got a little bit of irritation, or you might kind of find yourself totally out of whack. And so I think always just working to pacify each season as it comes up. Eat for that season, do yoga for that season, practice different daily routines for that season is all really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And that makes me think about, so if with the yoga sequences for each, I guess like dosha, can you work with those if you're out of balance as well? Or are those more specific like to the seasons?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So, in a public class, you don't know exactly what people's imbalances are. And so usually I just kind of do my sequence for whatever the season is, because we're all probably feeling some of that element in them. But yeah, absolutely. So I've also have resources on my website as well, where I've got, different sequences for every dosha, whether it's just that time of year or whether you've got an imbalance there that you're trying to work with. So I have listed out like a 5-minute sequence, a 15-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute sequence, and all different ones that are going to help to pacify whatever dosha we're working with. So there's certain poses that are helpful for some. Some poses are going to irritate others if we do them too much. I've also got in there, like we talked about before, like the styles of yoga that are helpful for each dosha, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. That's great. Well, I'll make sure that there's links to that on the show notes so people can go check it out. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned daily practices, which I think is a really great place to start, because I know, this stuff is like kind of big. It can kind of feel a little confusing,
Yeah.
at least for me when I hear it. And I feel like starting with like these little daily habits is like the best way to just start integrating it. So what are some ways that we can start applying it just day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So the diet is really the big one. And I know that there's other little things, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But so I also have lists of foods that are recommended and not recommended for each dosha, for each time of year. But then I think just keeping the food in balance is really one of the most effective things that we can do. Eating fresh what's in season, for the temperature and density of our foods. Eating the opposite of the weather outside is always helpful. So like in hot weather, you want to eat more cooling foods. In fall, you want to eat more grounding, spiced, earthy foods that are moist or oily. Those kind of things are really, really helpful. Adjusting the temperature of your water that you drink or your beverages that you drink to the opposite of the weather outside is usually a really good place to start. But in terms of Ayurveda, we have these practices are called dinacharya, which is just a Sanskrit word for your daily routine. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do. So like some things, a lot of us already do in Western culture. We just didn't really know they came from Ayurveda. So like you'll hear of dry brushing or neti pot, neti wash, all those different things all come from Ayurveda. So there's a lot of different ways that you can just take these little things that take you maybe anywhere from 10 seconds to 3 minutes a day and start to incorporate those just to start, again, just teaching your body how to read the things that are going on. So tongue scraping is probably the easiest one, and I love tongue scraping. It's one of the best ones that people really enjoy. So you can buy these. It's a stainless steel, just kind of like curved thing. It almost kind of looks like a walnut cracker. And you like the one that I got, I think was like $6. You can buy them at the drugstore. You can buy them online. And so it's just while you're brushing your teeth, you just use it to scrape your tongue, and then you rinse it off, scrape a couple more times. If you gag a lot, you don't have to go all the way back. You can just kind of scrape the front half of your tongue. But that one's really effective because so on our tongue, we have what Ayurveda calls ama, which is just toxins, or it's the product of our digestion. So in Ayurveda, again, as we're learning to read our bodies, you can always kind of tell if you had something that didn't digest very well by looking at your tongue the next morning. So a lot of times, like after you eat a lot of like sugar or carbs or things like that, you might wake up and you notice that your tongue has a little bit of a white coating on it or things like that. So tongue scraping helps to, number one, get you in the habit of kind of checking, okay, what does my tongue look like today? How did I digest, everything that I ate yesterday? And then also, okay, now we're going to scrape off those toxins from the tongue. And it takes 10 seconds, but it's super, super helpful. And people really like doing it. It makes your breath better, all good stuff. Hot lemon water is another really popular one in Ayurveda. So Ayurveda recommends that you start in the mornings with just 8 ounces of hot water with some lemon in it. And what that does is it helps to fire up your digestive fire for the day. So it just gets your digestion moving, turns on your metabolism, and just kind of gets your everything kind of started in terms of your elimination for the day, which is really helpful as well. Nasya oil is another practice in Ayurveda that's super helpful. This is one of my favorites. I used to live in a house with forced air. And in the winter, if I didn't oil my nose before I went to bed, I would wake up with a nosebleed. So Nasya oil is just sesame oil. It usually has some other herbs mixed into it. And then you just drop a couple of drops either on a Q-tip or right into your nose. And then you just kind of move it around there to coat the inside of your nose. And it can be really helpful just to keep everything, from drying out, from getting chapped in there. The oil helps to keep your nasal passages nice and clean and open. And all that is really, really helpful too. Neti wash, neti pot. I know a lot of people do this, and it's definitely an Ayurvedic practice. Really the big thing for neti pot, and the reason why it's important to do, is because, in yoga, we believe that we've got these energy channels that run through the nose. And so it's really important to help us keep those clean. And then the one big one that everybody really loves when they do, but it can be a little bit more challenging to fit into every day. So again, if you can do it twice a week or every other day, is dry brushing and oil massage. And so the idea here is that you take a dry brush, which is just a brush with bristles, nothing on it. If you are Pitta or Kapha, you use the bristle brush. If you're Vata, you can actually just use a regular dry washcloth. And so you just move the brush or the washcloth all the way around your skin. You take long strokes on your long bones, and then you do circles around your joints. And so that just kind of gets your skin opened up, waking up, I guess. And then it also works for lymphatic drainage to kind of get everything moving in circulation as well. And then you take an oil after. And so in the summer, Pittas can use a coconut oil. Everybody else is pretty much going to like to use a sesame oil because that's going to be a little bit more nourishing and heating. So you can actually just give yourself a 5-minute massage, like as if you were to go to a massage therapist. So not just kind of like the way that we just like put lotion on and just rub it on really quick, but really kind of letting yourself work in, with your hands into your muscles and let yourself kind of feel that nourishment, which is really helpful as well. Most people like to do the oil massage before they shower. So that's another recommendation I have as well. But some people, if you have really dry skin, you might not feel any discomfort with doing it after your shower if your skin absorbs the oil really quickly. But it's just a really, really nice one to do as well. Just really nourishing and really helpful, especially like in the fall, in Vata time of year, it can be just really, really nice practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love all of those. I've stuck with my tongue scraping and my lemon water, and I love the dry brushing and the oil massage. The other ones have been hit and miss just depending on where I am in the world. But I think I've told you this before, but I ordered a starter kit from Banyan Botanicals when I first was diving into this. And it comes with all that stuff. I still have my tongue scraper from that, and it gives you like little bottles of the oils. And for me, I felt like that was just like kind of a low investment way to just start trying a couple of things and just see like what I like and what I don't, I guess.
Yeah. And even a lot of like yoga studios these days are selling this kind of stuff, like the oils and all that kind of thing. But so it's been pretty easy to get your hands on. Like, you can get it from Amazon. There's different stores online. You can get this stuff at pretty readily. So yeah, some of it's just the figuring out how to use it. Like you can buy a neti pot at pretty much every drugstore, at least in the US. And then the salt that goes into it. So some of it's just kind of figuring out, okay, how do I use this? What's the benefit of using it? And then how is my body going to react? How's my body going to adapt to this? Is it helpful? Is it something that is worthwhile for me to keep doing? Or is this something where, I'm not really getting that much out of it? But there's a ton of these little things that are really, really helpful in Ayurveda. Again, taking anywhere from 10 seconds to 5 minutes a day that you can incorporate that are actually really, really rejuvenative in the body and really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I remember like the booklet that came along with the pack that I got. It said like, it was talking about, traditional practices. Like people would spend their first like few hours of their day. And I was like, who are these people? I have a full-time job. But once I got into it, I was like, okay, I can totally incorporate, the majority of the stuff in like 10 minutes.
I know. Some days, like, if I like don't have to go to work that day, or if it's like a weekend, and I usually teach classes first thing in the morning on weekends, but if I don't have to do that someday, I'm like, wow, I can take so much time to do my Ayurvedic routine. It feels great. But yeah.
This is what people did before internet
Exactly.
and all that
Exactly.
stuff.
Before internet and having to commute and all that. Or even like oiling the feet before bed with just some sesame oil is really, really nice. It's really helpful. And a lot of the things that we do with oil, the point is just to nourish, just to start to build up some nourishment in the body. The hydration of the oil is really, really helpful. And then they just make you feel great. It's really, really cool. And there's so many options.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like you said, like, yeah, if, these ancient people had 3 hours every day to do their entire routine, then sure, most of us can't fit in 3 hours, but it's just reminding ourselves that even if you don't have 3 hours, you can still do something really impactful in 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's just like remembering that, fitting one thing into your morning is better than not doing anything.
Exactly.
And that it doesn't
Yep.
have to be an all or nothing type thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. And so if people are interested in learning more about Ayurveda, what are some of your like top resource recommendations for them to dive in?
Yeah. So one of my favorites, there's a book called Eat, Taste, Heal. It's by Thomas Urema, Johnny Brannigan, and Daniel Rhoda. So they're a team of a doctor, a chef, and a dietitian. And so they have this full cookbook of all these different Ayurvedic recipes. And then they just have a full guide about Ayurveda that's super, super helpful. Sahara Rose is another one. She's on Instagram, and she has 2 books that are out as well. Super helpful. One of her books is a cookbook, and it's all plant-based. So Ayurveda itself is not vegan. It's not necessarily even vegetarian all the time. But Sahara has kind of changed all of those and given us new recommendations for people who are eating a plant-based diet, which is really, really cool as well. As I mentioned, Dr. John Douillard has a blog online. He's got a whole store online with different Ayurvedic products and a podcast that are helpful. And then you mentioned Banyan Botanicals a few times. That's another really, really helpful online store just to get every kind of supply for Ayurvedic self-care that you could ever need. And they've just got so many articles and a ton of information too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, I'll make sure that there's links for all of that. So thank you for sharing that. And I know you have resources on your website. So where can people go to find out more about you, to maybe, download your ebook and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is getyourlifetogetheryoga.com. My Instagram is the same, Get Your Life Together Yoga. You can email me. My email is kim@getyourlifetogetheryoga.com. And then I have a free ebook on my website that you can download that's kind of got all just like the quick information that we talked about today. I've got blog posts about how to balance for different seasons. I've got a blog post about Ayurvedic asana for yoga that can be helpful for folks as well. And then I also have a new ebook, Ayurveda 201, that's there as well. And that's got all those resources like the yoga sequences, everything in there for folks as well. And I also see people individually for Ayurveda sessions, either in person, on the phone, or online in video chat. And I travel for workshops too. So if anyone ever needs help making sense of all this or figuring out your own dosha, my website has a ton of info, or just reach out to me if you have any questions too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, Kim. This has been so awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
All right. I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Kim Fenton from Get Your Life Together Yoga on Ayurveda 101. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, I've had the chance to work with Kim one-on-one. It's been super awesome and super valuable for me. So if that's something you think might benefit you, your hormones, your life, I would definitely recommend checking her out and checking out the sessions that she has to offer. And there is a link to her website on the show notes, which you can find at wanderbarn.com/Kim Fenton, KIMFENTON. I also have a 30-day free trial of Audible for you guys. So if you head on over to bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Audible, the link's also on the show notes, but bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Audible, you can sign up for a 30-day free trial. And the reason why I have done this for you is because in each episode, we're talking about a ton of different resources, and I totally get it. It's expensive. Taking care of yourself is expensive. Finding resources is expensive. And, those $20 books add up a ton. And so you can download a ton of different content for free in your 30-day trial. And the thing that I love about audiobooks is that I can throw them on while I'm doing the laundry, the dishes, while I'm cleaning the house, while I'm at the gym, during my commute. And it's one of my favorite ways to take in my nonfiction reading content is just by listening to it. So once again, that link is bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Audible for a 30-day free trial. All right, that's all for me this week. I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode with Kim Fenton on Ayurveda 101, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Matcha Mornings. To find links mentioned in this episode, show notes, photos, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com/podcast/matcha-mornings. To be the first to know about brand new episodes of Matcha Mornings, subscribe on your podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please leave a review or send me an email at wanderbarn@gmail.com with the subject line Matcha Mornings. To follow along with me, Amanda Kingsmith, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Kingsmith to learn more about other fun projects I'm working on. To find more great podcasts like this one on topics such as travel, the business of yoga, cryptocurrency, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.